The low hills of the Alentejo lay hushed beneath a peach-colored dawn on 25th of July, 1139. Flickers of campfires dotted the plain like wandering stars, their smoke curling into the still cool air before dissolving in the widening light. By a rocky outcrop stood Count Afonso Henriques, 21 years of age, armored in mail and unshakable resolve. All night he had paced, absorbing the anxious whispers of knights, squires, and common foot soldiers alike. Yet his own thoughts were as steady as the polished steel in his hand. Portugal, no, the idea of Portugal, beat in his chest like a second heart. If victory came this day, he believed, the land south of the Mondego River would no longer be a mere outpost of Galicia or a contested march of Leon. It would be the seedbed of a sovereign realm, watered by blood, courage, and faith. For 7 years, Afonso had harried the Almoravid garrisons that dotted the frontier, tilting at watchtowers, dismantling supply trains, and persuading local Christians that his banner, the Silver Cross on a deep blue field, was the truest standard of their future. These successes, however, only aggravated Ibn Wazir, the formidable governor of Santarem and commander of Almoravid power in central Lusitania. When messengers carried news that Afonso's captains had seized Leiría's outworks in bold defiance, Ibn Wazir vowed to crush the upstart noble once and for all. He summoned Andalusian cavalry from the Guadiana, Berber infantry hardened by Saharan expeditions, and archers schooled in the precise art of horsebow warfare. Their combined strength, chroniclers would claim, swelled to 5, perhaps 6 times the numbers under Afonso's command. Yet raw arithmetic rarely decides the fate of peoples. The Count's army, though smaller, was stitched together by something more intimate than oaths of fealty. It was bound by a relentless hunger to carve self-determination out of the shifting tapestry of Iberian power. Nobles from Porto and Braga rode beside lesser gentry from the Douro Valley, while hardy militias of shepherds and woodcutters marched shoulder to shoulder with men who had only weeks before tilled vineyards or mended fishing nets along the coast. Many carried simple spears or axe hafts, weapons burnished by hope rather than war. All had heard the legends of Christian valor that spiraled across the peninsula, stories of Pelayo at Covadonga, of Charlemagne's paladins echoing through Roncesvalles, and they yearned to inscribe Portugal's name in that litany of resistance. Afonso did not hide from them the magnitude of the day's peril. Just after matins, he gathered his captains inside a makeshift circle of shields. Candle stubs flickered in the dawn dim, illuminating faces lined by weather and anticipation. "We stand upon the hinge of destiny," he declared, his voice calm yet resonant. "Beyond these slopes lies either the shadow of submission or the sunrise of a new kingdom. The Almighty knows which banner he will bless, but our task is clear. Give him fewer reasons to abandon us than to favor us." His words traveled outward through the ranks, carrying with them a spark of purpose that even fear could not fully smother. By mid-morning, the horizon trembled with the advance of Ibn Wazir's host. Plumes of dust signaled each cavalry detachment, while spearheads gleamed like a second dawn behind the first. Moorish drums pounded, sounding distances before the soldiers themselves could be seen, a percussive prophecy of the collision to come. To the Portuguese militia, it seemed as though the earth itself marched against them. Yet Afonso reacted not with wide-eyed trepidation, but with calculated composure. He ordered his men to form a broad semicircle along a shallow ridge, anchoring both flanks against thorny scrubland too rough for horses to navigate easily. The front line, composed of spearmen and pavisiers, knelt behind wooden stakes hammered into the ground. while archers took position just behind. His knights, heavy cavalry whose lances bore tiny pennons fluttering blue and white, remained concealed behind the ridge's reverse slope, waiting for the signal to emerge like thunder from a clear sky. Ibn Wazir surveyed the Portuguese formation from afar and dismissed it as a paltry barricade of timbers and desperation. He ordered his Andalusian light cavalry to probe the flanks, confident they would encircle the Christians and squeeze them inward like a tightening noose. As the Muslim horsemen thundered forward, their curved blades catching the sun, Afonso raised his sword high. Its polished brilliance flashed a command. Archers loosed. A hail of ash-feathered shafts streaked downward in a long, ominous hiss, piercing horseflesh, armor, and shields alike. Riders tumbled. Horses reared. Momentum faltered. Before Ibn Wazir could issue new orders, another volley blotted the sky, followed by a third. The advancing wings lost coherence. What seemed at first a cowering hedge of peasants had become a bristling wall of defiance. Observing the disruption, Afonso seized his moment. He spurred his mount up the gentle incline and emerged atop the ridge, flanked by a wedge of mailed knights, whose presence raised a collective cheer from the Portuguese line. With a swift downward sweep of his blade, he signaled the charge. Hooves shattered the still-forming recollection of Muslim confidence. Lances leveled, the Portuguese cavalry crashed into the disordered left flank of Ibn Wazir's army. The impact was violent, but precise, akin to a hammer striking the exact flaw in an iron bar to split it. Panic rippled through the Moorish ranks as horses collided and footmen stumbled beneath sudden chaos. On the opposite flank, a similar scene unfolded. Afonso had dispatched a second, smaller contingent of knights under his trusted lieutenant, Egas Moniz. Their task was not to shatter, but to harry, to keep the enemy's right wing uncertain and overstretched. They darted in, delivered spear thrusts, withdrew, and repeated, planting seeds of confusion that bloomed into tactical paralysis. Midfield, Portuguese spearmen locked shields in tight formation, their long shafts preventing Moorish infantry from closing for sword work. Each thrust was a prayer in motion, each block a vow that ground would not be yielded. Ibn Wazir, sensing his encirclement splintering, attempted to rally his Berber reserves. Trumpets blared. Standard-bearers waved green banners inscribed with Quranic verses. Clerics shouted verses of divine exhortation. The reserves advanced with grim determination, their almond-shaped shields overlapping like dragon scales. They aimed directly for the Portuguese center, hoping to bisect Afonso's line and surround the flanking cavalry from within. For a breathless moment, it seemed the gamble might succeed. Portuguese spears wavered, and the Christian archers, having spent many of their arrows, struggled to slow the steady Almoravid advance. Afonso galloped to the threatened sector. Dust swirled around him as he dismounted, walked among the front ranks, and placed a hand upon the trembling shoulder of a young foot soldier whose first glimpse of battle paled his cheeks. "Steady, Irmão," the Count whispered. "Steel and soul can outlast any storm if they stand together." He turned to the ranks. "Forward but one pace. Tuftui," he commanded. "Meet them upon your own breath." The formation shifted, not sweeping backward, but inching forward, its collective grit hardening like molten ore quenched in frigid water. When the Berber vanguard slammed against the interlinking shields, they found not frailty, but a wall suddenly alive with renewed force. Short swords thrust between shield rims, axes rose and plunged. Voices cried, "Portugal! until the morning sky itself seemed to echo the name of a nation not yet born, yet already sung into being. Meanwhile, on the high ground behind Ibn Wazir's lines, a plume of Portuguese dust signaled the appearance of something altogether unexpected. Pack mules drawing carts that billowed with white cloth. Each mule driver yanked aside the drapery to reveal crossbowmen, newly arrived volunteers from Christian enclaves further north. They had marched all night through winding sheep tracks to reinforce Afonso. Now, from their vantage, they loosed quarrels into the rear of the Berber reserves, sowing fresh disarray precisely when Ibn Wazir needed cohesion. The command structure of the Almoravid governor began to fracture as messengers struggled to ride through knotting skirmishes and an ascending sense of doom. By midday, the battlefield had transformed into a tapestry of dust hazes and clanging iron, but its shape betrayed a decisive tilt. Portuguese cavalry now roamed the field like swift meteors, slicing residual pockets of resistance into ever smaller fragments. Egas Moniz's squadron crashed upon the enemy baggage train, scattering supply guards and igniting wagons laden with dried figs, leather tents, and arrow barrels. Smoke curled above the plain, signaling all who fought that fortune's tide had shifted irrevocably. It was then, as legend would later embroider, that Count Afonso experienced a vision so radiant it seemed to halt the surge of violence in mid-breath. Chroniclers wrote that a luminous cross, or Christ himself, appeared above the battlefield, bathing the young leader in a nimbus of golden light. Whether miracle or myth, the tale galvanized his warriors for generations to come. In that moment, real or imagined, Afonso raised his sword once more, not in the calculated language of command, but in an almost liturgical gesture, fusing piety with power. The men closest to him felt a chill course through sweat-drenched armor. Some wept behind dented helmets. Others roared an oath that the ground they held would be the cornerstone of a kingdom ordained by heaven. Under that swelling conviction, the Portuguese line pressed forward as one. Moorish resistance contracted into erratic clusters, brave stands by seasoned veterans whose discipline could not compensate for the collapsing skeleton of overall strategy. Ibn Wazir himself, surrounded by his personal guard, made a final attempt to rally dissenting sub-commanders. But rumors of encirclement and the spreading fires near the baggage train smothered his authority. At last, with dusk beginning to rim the sky in amber, he gave the reluctant order to withdraw toward the Guadiana, hoping to salvage what remained of his army across the river's natural barrier. Yet retreat soon degenerated into flight as Portuguese cavalry harried the rear, cutting down stragglers and capturing standards that would become trophies in Coimbra's cathedrals. When the sun finally slipped behind the hills, the fields of Ourique fell silent, save for the crackle of small fires and the distant sob of wounded men, Christian and Muslim alike. The cost of victory weighed heavily. Hundreds of Portuguese lay motionless among shattered pikes and trampled banners. Yet the survivors, from grizzled knight to barefoot farmer's son, felt something lift within them, a dawning certainty that they had collectively authored the first chapter of an uncharted chronicle. Torches were lit, and men walked among their fallen companions with solemn reverence, knowing the lives surrendered here would echo through every prayer, every harvest, every newborn cry in the land they longed to call their own. That night, in a hastily erected pavilion embroidered with simple linen rather than any royal brocade, Afonso Henriques convened his captains. Moonlight spilled through the tent's opening, silvering their battered helms as if sheathing them in quiet approval. The Count, exhausted yet unbowed, stood before a small chest that contained relics of his lineage, a charred fragment of his father's banner, a cross given by his mother Teresa, and a parchment letter of goodwill from the Archbishop of Braga. He placed them on a wooden stool, then drew his sword and laid it across the relics as though bridging the past to the future. With a measured breath, he declared, "By God's grace, Portugal hath wrought its own destiny today. No longer shall we bow as mere vassals. Before these witnesses and before the Almighty, I take upon myself the crown of this realm." Voices murmured in astonishment. Some captains glanced toward the relics, seeking divine affirmation. Others exchanged wary glances, aware that the notion of a Portuguese kingship would inflame not only Moorish adversaries, but also Christian rivals in Leon and Castile. Yet none could dispute the moral authority carved upon the field that day. Egas Moniz stepped forward, knelt, and touched the tip of Afonso's sword hilt. "My king," he said simply. One by one, every captain followed, until the wooden stool seemed an altar, and the rough pavilion a coronation hall echoing with the vows of a nascent monarchy. In the days that followed, news of the triumph at Ourique spread like wildfire across Iberia. In monasteries from Braga to Santiago, monks inscribed lively accounts of a miracle-laden victory delivered by divine warrant. Minstrels carried the tale to market squares, weaving lyrical embellishments that thrilled cobblers and fishmongers alike. Peasant families in distant valleys, scarcely touched by the politics of kings and caliphs, now spoke of Portugal with mingled pride and curiosity. Even foreign envoys, wary of the peninsula's tangled politics, took note. A new player had stepped onto Europe's chessboard, brandishing both sword and cross. Politically, the ramifications were immediate. While Leonese courtiers whispered skepticism, affirming that Afonso was still, by law, a rebellious count, Alfonso VII, known as the Emperor of all Hispania, recognized the brewing complexity of ignoring the victor of Ourique. He dispatched letters that oscillated between congratulation and warning, acknowledging valor while reminding his cousin of feudal bonds. Afonso, cautious yet resolute, replied with carefully weighed courtesies, but refrained from relinquishing a single inch of authority gained. The stage was set for decades of negotiation, conflict, and alliance, in which Portugal, though small, would maneuver with an agility born of its baptism by battle. Spiritually, Ourique sank deep roots into the Portuguese imagination. Chroniclers like Afonso's chaplain Soeiro Mendes portrayed the battle as a second Constantine moment, wherein divine vision sanctioned not merely a military victory, but a national vocation to defend the Christian cause while cultivating a unique identity at the western edge of Europe. Pilgrims flocked to the site, now ringed by simple wooden crosses, marking where key moments of the clash had unfolded. Local shepherds would later swear that the grass on those patches grew taller and greener, nourished by more than ordinary soil. Yet Afonso understood that the aura of sanctity could not alone secure his borders. In the months after Ourique, he embarked on a feverish campaign of fortification and diplomacy. Stone castles sprouted along the Tagus and Mondego like sentinels carved from living granite. He granted charters to towns, inviting settlers under favorable terms that promised protection and the possibility of upward mobility. Knights from Burgundy, Normandy, and even the Rhineland rode south to take up feudal grants, augmenting Portugal's martial sinews with fresh strands of experience and ambition. The idea of a kingdom once fragile as ash in the wind now thickened into sturdy oak. Ibn Wazir's defeat, however, did not mark the end of Almoravid influence. Across the Guadiana, surviving emirs consolidated under new leaders who vowed revenge. Castles at Evora, Beja, and Mertola bristled with troops, becoming thorns in the Portuguese flank. Skirmishes flared like brushfires for years, each side probing weaknesses, each claiming isolated triumphs. Yet, the psychological high ground, one atop the dusty ridges of Ourique, remained unassailable. Tales of Afonso's vision and the miraculous victory stiffened Portuguese resolve whenever fortunes wavered. The memory of shields interlocked, of archers unleashing salvation from behind wooden stakes, of a nation glimpsed in the gleam of a single blade. These formed an invisible rampart around every future campaign. Decades later, when chroniclers set quill to parchment to recount Portugal's early genesis, they invariably returned to Ourique as the hinge upon which every subsequent door swung open. They painted the battle not as a mere clash of arms, but as a covenant between ruler and ruled, between earth and heaven. Whether embellishment or accurate recall, their tales kindled the hearts of children who would become the explorers, poets, and philosophers of a kingdom destined to launch caravels beyond known oceans. The spirit of Ourique, born beneath a shy Portuguese dawn and sealed by dusk's victorious hush, would sail with them across horizons unimaginable in 1139. Thus, the dust of Ourique settled, but its story never did. It lived in stone buttresses of monasteries, in the cadence of folk songs, in laws that claimed justice must stand firm, even when armies tremble. Above all, it lived in the conviction that size is no measure against resolve, that miracles favor those who labor for them, and that a people, once awakened to the melody of their own destiny, can seldom be forced back into silence.